Every character, location, or experience you've read about in my crime fiction novels holds a piece of reality. I'm Helen Taylor. Welcome to the story behind my stories, the video podcast where crime fiction meets my authentic experience. Here, we delve into the real-life inspirations and intimate stories that shaped my novels. Discover how my everyday encounters, adventures, and travels translate into tales as gripping as they are genuine. The story behind my stories goes behind the words on the page to reveal the backstory that inspires my writing. Hit follow or subscribe and ensure you're part of this journey. Hi, welcome to episode 6 of season 5, the story behind my stories. The story behind Don't Die For Me, Argentina. So we're just coming up to 3 weeks since launch, and I'm loving the feedback. Everybody is very, very much, can't put it down, the atmosphere of the whole thing is really well done, which I'm really loving because it is based on a real place and my real experience. So this week there's a little bit less of the book and more of my adventure doing the cattle drive across Argentina, across Patagonia. So that first ride we covered last week, which was when we went out on a test ride so that we could all check that we were happy with our horses and able to continue the ride and go out then permanently. So part of the reason that I wanted to do a genuine cattle drive type ride was because I wanted to do it how they did it, not stay in a plush, fully decorated up luxury ranch house and go out for a little horse ride every day and learn how to steer, how to rope steers and lasso and things like that. I didn't want that manufactured fake experience. I wanted the real deal in the remoteness, and rather than a cowboy type holiday in America. And in the story behind my stories book of the story behind Don't Die For Me Argentina, I will go into my experience of cowboys in America and the opportunities that I may have had there. But this was very much almost that old Wild West feeling that isn't there so much in America anymore. And just the wild of Patagonia was it, you know. So we all enjoyed that first meal in the farmhouse, and I think we all figured that it would be a little bit simpler and a little bit less tasty when we were out beyond range. Now on this trip, I think we rode for a day, stayed overnight, and then rode a little bit further. And then we got to the point where we could not be accessed by car or buggy or anything. From that point on, it was foot or horseback. And I think I've said before, the plan was to go out by 3 days or whatever, and then drive the cattle back because they were going from the higher up pastures to pastures closer to the ranch house. And so we were expecting the food. I don't know that we even thought about it or were sure how the food was going to work out when we were further away. But the first stop on the first day was set the tone, and all of us were a little bit astounded. And I did use that in the book. So whilst I said we're not going to do so much of the book because we start getting to the point where we are getting into the crux of the story and I don't want to ruin any of the story. And this is the story behind my story. So this is a lot more my life experience for this. But I am going to read you that first stop from the book. It's from episode 6. They'd been riding for 3 hours when they stopped for lunch. They'd covered a fair amount of ground, and the land hadn't seemed inaccessible until they reached the area where the truck was parked. They all dismounted and tied their horses haphazardly to branches or twiggy, scraggly bushes at the top of the hill. They'd reached it by following a path next to a riverbed, then climbing up behind trees and bushes, so they had no idea the truck was there until the last moment. Andreas came to help with the horses. They had to untack them all. The saddles were just left where they fell. Andreas directed them down a steep bank as he carried supplies from the truck he'd driven therein. So this was similar to us in that Andreas, or his equivalent in the real world, he came and met us with sort of fresh food and meat, and we had the same on our last night going back because that was the last sort of accessible point, the night of this day. Sorry if that's confusing. Andreas directed them down a steep bank as he carried supplies from the truck he'd driven therein. Roberto and Gina had led the ride that morning, with Annabella bringing up the rear and taking lots of videos and photographs of everyone. The whole group was together, and as they reached the bottom of the hill, the space opened out into a small beach area where the river bent round. It was stunning. This was what Penny had come for. The turquoise blue of the river, the sun, the sheer beauty of it. Nature untouched at its best. Everybody stripped off outer garments, changed into bikinis and swim shorts, and went into the river. Now, that was exactly the moment. And if you follow me on social media, you'll know that I am a part of a community called TBM, To Be Magnetic. And in one of their DIs, or in all of their DIs, you go to a place in nature. And this stop is my place. This is the place I go to whenever I do one of their proprietary meditation neural programming things. That is how stunning it is. And it is also in the starter video of the podcast, and obviously will most definitely be in the book version of the story behind my stories. But the river came round in an L shape, and this sort of base camp was right on the corner of the L. And the river was deep, and you could wade out and swim across and get out on the other side and look back on it as well. And it was just stunning. The river was turquoise blue. It's not like, oh, rivers here. And then we had sort of the fire camp to one side, the sort of beach bit. And then overhanging the beach, which is where we'd put the horses and walked down from, there was sort of an overhang bit, and the river was that deep you could jump or dive off that top overhanging bit. And everybody did, except for me, because I had my ACL injury at the time. That and one other thing on the whole trip I couldn't partake in without potentially doing myself more damage. So I didn't get to do that, so I got to take loads of photos and watch them do it. But I did use it in the book. There was, in the book, there's something a little bit dodgy goes on at that point, so I'm not going to do that bit. But I'm going to read a bit of that so that you get the idea. She turned back towards the water, took a deep breath and stepped out. For a moment there was the brain freeze shock of nothing beneath her, then the sensation of her tiny frame slipping through the warm air. Her thighs, ankles, knees, hips, body and head moved from the heat into the cooler water of the river, gravity pulling her down until the energy dispersed and she almost sprang back to the surface. She gasped in the air she'd held and swam to the edge, exhilarated. She wanted nothing more than to climb out and take her turn again. And that was how they all talked about it. Now, this is a prime example of my experience, but twisted, shaped, exaggerated, manipulated. I was there, I saw people do it, I could imagine that. I didn't actually do it because of my knee. But I could imagine how it felt, and I could imagine the whole thing from being there and seeing them do it and their expressions, etc. It's rare for it not to be direct experience of mine, but I couldn't risk it with my knee. After the third time round, Gina and Andres, overseen by Roberto, told them lunch was ready. They'd been tending a fire encased with rocks, a grate over the top and a frying pan warming itself with whatever was in it, just out of reach of the flames. It smelled great as they lay on the bank, drying off in the sun, laughing and reminiscing over their jumps. Who'd been the most elegant, who'd been the most scared. Andreas came round offering crisps. Chips to Americans listening. One taste. Warm, salty, oily, just fried on the very fire they'd watched dance. Fresh, handmade crisps. Which were out of this world. Really out of this world. When lunch was served, it was a Spanish tortilla. Layers of beautifully sliced potatoes coated in egg and set firm over the fire. Served with salad, it tasted amazing. Wow, what's in this? It's delicious. I don't know how you made this over a fire, asked Elizabeth. Andreas answered in very good English. Just potatoes, eggs, salt and oil. That's it. There's something about preparing and cooking it out in the open air that adds something. They all nodded, and a silence settled as they savoured the unexpected but very welcome lunch and break in their day. It tasted out of this world. I mean, I can't express enough. And not just, wow, that tastes really great for having been cooked on an open fire. It it tasted better than it would have in a kitchen. Um, it was incredible, and that actually was the vein of the whole of the rest of the trip's food. There, it was like having a gourmet lunch and a gourmet dinner every single day. And it was amazing. As we got out of touch, the meals became more based from, what do I want to say, dried store cupboardy type stuff, so like lentils um, and vegetables, over fresh meat, fresh dairy sort of stuff, because um, we couldn't keep it cold. So, but that you wouldn't, without knowing that, you wouldn't have known that that was why the difference was. Um, so then we moved on. We did stay and lounge around on the beach, go back in for a swim, have a snooze, read, chill for a good few hours. Then continued so that we weren't riding in the very heat of the day. After another 3 hours riding that afternoon, leaving behind the stunning beach on the river bank, they'd followed the river as it meandered through the valley. They wandered away from it and back again, crossing it several times until a patch of open, greener land lay before them. Andrea said, "This is our camp for the night." They all looked around. There was nothing here. Penny could faintly make out a wire fence, a sort of corral, only visible by the posts at the four corners. They each dismounted, removed their horses' bridles and saddles, and turned them out into the corral. Gina handed out tents, and people chose where they fancied pitching them and who they wanted to pitch with. Penny ends up doing it with Anik. Myself and James, we decided we were, and because we both had this same shared dream of sleeping under the stars, we didn't weren't bothered about the tent. I know, as I read before and mentioned, Thomas had said about it being really cold at night, and we were advised to bring stuff like that to sleep in, but we were still quite low in the valley and not up in the mountains so much at that point. So I'll read on. Penny searched for a flat area when the two of them laid their saddles and bridles down. It turned out, on receiving their tent, that the blankets under their saddles would double as their mattresses overnight. Penny sat on the ground, exhausted, untying her sleeping bag from the rear of her saddle, and said to Anik, "Do we really want to pitch the tent? I'm happy to if you want to, but I'm going to sleep under the stars tonight, not in the tent." Anik dropped down beside her. "No, that works for me. I'm exhausted. I'm not sure any other night is going to be any different. Yeah, I'm happy to just sleep out here in the open." They set to work laying out their beds, using the blankets first, their saddlebags as pillows, and the sheepskin for their hips. They arranged their little camp and took a flannel down to the river to wash the red dust off their exposed skin. Penny had flip-flops, so she changed out of her boots and socks into them, which was most welcomed by her feet, and then into the cool water she waded. That was exactly what me and James did on our first night. We were, I don't think you could have wiped the smile off our faces with anything. That was, turning up and this is where we're camping. There's nothing here. Exactly what we wanted. Didn't want a makeshift campsite. We didn't want anything. We wanted it to be wholly wild camping with our horses. And that was exactly what we got. And when you have been riding all day and your boots and your feet are swollen because of the heat and because you've been riding and because you've been drinking a lot, because we had a lot to drink the night before, then just that refreshingness of walking out into this beautifully clear, free-flowing water was just, it is so hard to explain that, to the extent that that small thing was so dream completing, that it was, all of it was far and away surpassed what both of us wanted from the whole experience. As they climbed out of the water slightly refreshed, they wandered off to find the others and the campfire. Most of them were already at the fire, sat on planks of wood, held just off the ground by large rocks. On their sheepskin rugs from their saddles, which now seemed to double not only as pillows but also seats on the ground. Elizabeth sat on a tiny stool, a board on her lap, a knife in her hand, slicing vegetables. Gina was busy building the fire and keeping it going as the smell of lamb lifted through the air. Penny couldn't make out if it was a full or half carcass of lamb, but it smelled amazing. The fat crackling as it rendered and the juices dripping into the fire. That smells incredible. We definitely aren't eating light, Penny laughed. Gina smiled as she continued tending the fire, moving things around and placing a pot of water on to boil. I bet you weren't expecting this. Not at all. It's fantastic, said Anique. She leaned in over the fire and the lamb and sniffed deeply. My mouth is just filling with saliva. I can't wait to eat this. She stood up and stepped back next to Penny, staring at the flames and the meat as it cooked. And that was it. As we walked in, there literally is a half carcass, which you will see in the intro to the podcast on the video versions. This half carcass of lamb that's spiked over the fire. And lamb is my favourite meat. And apart from the fact that it smelled incredible and your mouth did water, it tasted even better. The lamb, they say Argentina is, no one makes steak like Argentina. Well, I can tell you here and now, nobody makes lamb like Argentina either. I've had it in New Zealand, I've had it in Wales, I've had it in Crete. Their lamb was really, really good too. But Argentina, out of this world. I would say Argentina, no one does meat like Argentina. It was incredible. Where is everybody else? Asked Penny. Gina nodded to the clearing behind them where the river snaked around. They walked along the path past the entrance to the toilet, which was actually a hole in the ground with a toilet seat placed over it, a little way from camp and hidden behind a tree. The only telltale sign was a toilet roll hanging in the bushes. As they walked out onto the open bank of the river, they could see Andreas, in shorts up to just above his knees, standing in the river with a long line. The rest of the group sat quietly on the bank watching. Penny looked back at the rest of them just as Andres called out, "I've got one!" He grappled with the line in what seemed like a haphazard fashion, drawing the fish towards him until he lifted it out of the water, still flapping and flipping. He grasped it round the belly with one large hand, laid it on a rock, picked up a nearby stone, and ended its misery. Another out in the real wilderness murder. Not so much like that. But it was that was what we had as a starter, and then we had the lamb as the main meal with the vegetables that they chopped and cooked, and it was just, I don't know if some of it was so hungry from being outside and physical all day, or I don't know, but yeah, every single meal on that trip I remember vividly, and I've never tasted stuff as good. So I'm going to leave it there because we're at time and continue this next week. But this episode, this is all about the food. This was all about the food and just those extra little bits that just kept giving us our dream come true. So I'll catch you next week. If you haven't started the book yet, Kindle Unlimited, Kindle, or the paperback or hardback versions, give it a read. And let me know what you think. Catch you next week.